Do you see my screen?
Looks perfect.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. This is group 4 with school law. We have chapter 5 that we're sharing with you guys. This is Chris Gahan.
I'm Pam Ashcraft.
And I'm Claudia Rivera, and I'm going to do the first part of our presentation. So chapter 5, individuals with disabilities. We're going to get started with Individuals with Disability Education Act of 1990. In 1975, Congress enacted PL 94-142, the Education of All Handicapped Children's Act. During this time, roughly 4 million of these children had not been provided appropriate education, and about 1 million children with disabilities had not received any type of public education. Based off of this kind of forced Congress to kind of look into this, because parents were forced to look elsewhere to seek assistance for their children. Again, based off this finding and the interventions that they had to undergo, in 1990, they referred to it as Individuals with Disability Education Act. Again, because the number of children who had been classified disabled was increasing. So the DEA essentially guarantees that a disabled child ages 3 to 21 receive free appropriate education in public schools. The act also establishes substantive and procedural due process rights, and what those are is the procedural requirements. Again, requires the IEP to know how and when the IEP is going to be developed, and that it contains all the required information. Substantive requirements requires that the IEP is meaningful, that it monitors the progress of the child, and that it changes when the student has made progress, and if a student is not making progress. This one came more, sorry. So the interpretation of, sorry, one second here. Okay, so the interpretation of identification of the Children with Disability Act, the term children with disabilities is defined by the IDEA, and those who meet here are some of them: hearing impaired, speech or language impaired, visual impaired, blindness. And if you go to the next slide, there's a couple more: learning disabilities, brain injuries, emotional, specific learning disabilities, such as conditions that need special education and related services.
And Claudia, you know what I liked about this was that these statutes were enacted to protect individuals with disabilities from discrimination and giving them equal opportunities to the education, because that wasn't really happening when all this kind of started.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And if continuing on with some of the requirements that were put into place because that was going on, at a minimal, each individual education program should include the following: a statement detailing the child's present level of education, so where they currently are, a statement of the annual goals, as well as the short-term instructional objectives. Again, this needs to include the learning goals, certain steps on how to get there, things that they should be meeting, description of the specific, like each IEP needs to be specific to each child. Again, there cannot be a one size fits all, because that is not the case. All of our children have many different learning needs. Going on to the next slide, a description of transitional service. Again, to ensure the necessary services are provided when a child leaves the regular school environment. Going on to 5 and 6, again, what kind of services are going to be provided. Make sure that it's timeable, and an explanation of relevant criteria and procedures to be employed annually to determine if the instructional objectives are and have been achieved. Is the student meeting their goals? And if not, what's the next process?
So I think together we're going to kind of share the response to intervention. It involves a combination of assessments and interventions used to provide early effective assistance support to children who are experiencing difficulty in learning. This was kind of established through the federal government as a way to jump in before necessarily just putting kids in special education. They were looking for indicators that were showing that they were struggling, and then trying to identify what part of the learning disability or what specifically they were struggling with, and then putting in place supports and different interventions to try and help them build those weaknesses and find ways to make them be successful in the classroom.
And it's all data-based is the big thing.
Yes, exactly.
All
And so
database.
Definitely.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I was just going to add that, it's to help reduce the student failures, identifying it appropriately so that these interventions can be put into place.
Yes, and it talked about because we're kind of doing this in our school right now, is the MTSS, multi-tiered system of support, is part of response to intervention. So there's different tiers that they put in based on the kids' needs and the severity of what they're struggling with. And so I've kind of been excited to learn about this a little bit more and figure out what different things that you can do to get help for those kids without waiting until things are really not going well for them.
Exactly. Equal access to assistive technology for disabled students. The Technology Related Assistance with Individuals with Disabilities Act amendments of 1994. It's basically providing what kind of financial assistance the schools are responsible for. You have to involve anything that directly assists a child with a disability. So it may include assistive technology, maintaining, repairing, or replacing the assistive technology, coordinating other therapies, interventions, anything that will be used for the assisting a student to be their best will be required by the school. The next thing would be IEPs. And the program and review and changes of IEPs. Each IEP is reviewed and revised annually if necessary. Just making sure the needs of the child are met. If changes are contemplated, the child's parents or legal guardian must be notified. So anybody with an IEP needs to have parent consent to change what they're doing. If anybody objects to the proposed changes, an impartial hearing must be held to resolve the conflict. That means if changes to the IEP are needed after the annual meeting, the parent must in writing agree that all the IEP team needs to meet, and they will figure out what the changes need to be. And the parent can also in writing decide that if changes needed for an IEP need to be made, that they can do it without the IEP present, but it just has to be in writing by the parent. The educated related service requirement is that a related service is viewed as one that must be provided to allow the disabled child to benefit from special education. A related services may be a single service or an entire range of services or programs needed to benefit the child. Some dispute has arisen debating where the responsibility of medical assistant lies, where it becomes, is it a doctor thing or is it a school thing? There's a case in Iowa where a student with disabilities requested that the school district provide services based on being in a wheelchair and ventilator dependent. And is it the school's responsibility to needing one-on-one assistance from a nurse? And the court decided that it was the school district's responsibility to provide the nurse and during their service hours. So it's during that time, it is the school's responsibility to require that. If it's anything where it's like a specific medical need that needs to be a doctor then the school does not have to require it. But if it's like something that's a nurse can do, then the school is required to provide it. Some of these services are transportation, medical services, counseling services, psychological services, physical therapy, speech pathology, audiology, and OT, occupational therapy. In my school, I work in Winnebago, Nebraska, so it's a reservation school, and we provide, there's a whole separate building for counseling services that the school has to pay for. So it's just depending on what your needs are as a district.
You know, Pam, I had a weird situation in my school. We have a child that has type 2 diabetes. And again, she's not educationally struggles. It's just the time it takes because she doesn't manage her diabetes very well. So we're struggling with trying to figure out how to make sure she's passing her classes while maintaining, her health issues. But it's been a really big struggle because again, it's trying to draw that line between like her medical needs and her educational needs and making sure.
Exactly, and this is exactly what that covers. Is it still is the school's responsibility that she receives her medical needs during the school time, is what that was saying.
Exactly.
It's hard. Yeah.
Very challenging.
And the last part for me is least restrictive environment. The IDEA embraces the notion that children with disabilities be placed in educational settings which offer the least amount of restrictions when appropriate. It's kind of a relative thing though when you decide what is an LRE for each child. For one student, it could be completely appropriate for, and the next one, it's not. So you have to really think about the instructional and social needs of the student that need to be considered. There are some placement options where one is regular, just being in a regular classroom, regular day. The special ed student is just part of the routine. The next part would be a regular class, but they have like support instruction, like a para or teacher assistant would be with that child, or as much as they can be with that child to help them through the day. Another one would be a regular class with special ed resource instruction. That would be more, they're still in the classroom, but there's a special ed teacher involved just to help that child. They can receive full-time special education in a regular school, so they're just basically in a special education room all day. They could be in a full-time special school, a residential school, or even a homebound instruction could be appropriate. It's just whatever that least restrictive environment is for that student is what is expected. The primary objective is to provide the disabled child an opportunity to interact, socialize, and learn with regular students. That basically just makes them not stigmatized and isolated from the school's regular program. It's just their best learning environment.
Oh, is that you still? Sorry.
Oh, nope, it's you.
Okay, nope, you're okay. I'm just going to talk a little bit and jump in as you'd like to. Inclusion is the extension of the traditional concept of mainstreaming. I think when this all began, it was just seen that a lot of times the kids were excluded from a regular classroom, which then made it seem socially different for them. So they tried to do what they called mainstreaming, meaning putting them in the classrooms. Inclusion is basically taking that child and deciding what is appropriate in the school day that fits their needs. And for like one of my kids, he's pretty much in all regular classrooms, except for when it comes to math, he's that's his area that he's identified in. So he goes to a specific resource room to receive direct instruction on math. He does do activities in the regular math classroom as allowed, so he can do group work and different things that meet the needs of him. There's also residential facilities. They're typically expensive, in most cases, most restrictive for the disabled child. I know right now I have a student that's oppositional defiant. We have sent him to more of a behavior school because for him, it focuses on helping him build those skills behaviorally so he can function in a school day. We hope to transition him back. That'll look a little bit different because he will have kind of a part of a school day where he will come to us and he'll still go to his school. And we work together with that school to learn the strategies that they use with him so we can have consistency, because that's a big part of which help him be successful. However, IDA requires such placements where there is sufficient evidence that residential placement is necessary to provide special education related services to disabled. We're in a really small school district. I know a lot of that just kind of comes down to the IEP team and what we can agree upon with the parents. Obviously, they're part of the IEP team. It's just really important that you do what's best for the child and the team agrees to it to get the best plan in place for it to be successful for them. I'm going to talk a little bit about isolation and restraint laws for students with disabilities. Just pointing out a few facts, a number of states have passed legislation governing isolation and restraint practices for students with disabilities. These laws were enacted to protect the safety and welfare of students. There was several examples in different states as far as the danger of isolation and restraint. Some cases to point out, there was a student that was being restrained by his teacher in a school district because he was wanting to go to the lunchroom and he was restraining him. The student was telling him that he couldn't breathe, but the teacher did not listen to him and he ended up dying of suffocation. Another one was when a student was put into an isolation room with a piece of rope that was given to him to help keep his pants up, and he had hung himself. So there's a lot of things that have kind of come down to showing things that we need to make sure are in place for these kids as far as the safety of the isolation rooms, having teachers and staff trained for the restraint laws. I know in our school we do a MANT training we go through to every year to be recertified, where they show you how to properly restrain kids. Obviously these restraints and isolation rooms should be in place for the safety of the student and the staff and the other students in the building. They did talk a little bit about a chemical restraint, which was interesting to me because I guess in some states, in some situations, they are able to prescribe a medication to restrict their freedom of movement to control extreme violent misbehavior. And that was kind of a little bit shocking to me, but I guess it does exist, but there are a lot of concerns towards that.
Seems like there'd be a lot of legal issues with that.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, it was. And then there was isolation or seclusion typically involves confinement of a student alone in a room in an area where student is physically prevented from leaving. Early on, you were able to just pretty much put a kid in a room and lock them so they couldn't get out. Now they recommend being supervised and making sure the teacher keeps that student safe and is aware of them, because a lot of times with they have emotional disturbances too, where kids needed to be observed. It does say the U.S. Department of Education has developed 15 principles that it recommends to be used as a foundation for policies and procedures in public schools. It was noted that making sure that you're following these and meeting with the parents can help keep the school safe from any incidences or obviously court cases involving any problems that you might have. It was very disappointing. There was a lot of student deaths that involved physical or restraints in Michigan, Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, and other states. So, so these laws also cover conditions. Oh, sorry. Did I maybe go back, Pam? Sorry.
Sorry.
I don't know if I got through the last slide. Oh, you're good. I guess you're right.
Keep on.
Just basically making sure the school districts are trained and not even initially trained, continually trained, and make yourself aware of different court cases out there and different concerns. As you know, education is always ever evolving. Okay, I'm ready for the next one. Sorry, Pam.
Oh, you're fine.
Disciplining students with disabilities has long been held that disabled children may not be punished for conduct that is a manifestation of their disability. So I have a student that's oppositional defiant, and I know when they get very frustrated and upset that they are not going to comply with any requests. So we have to be very careful to make sure that any punishment does not come from those periods when they are struggling with what it is that they're labeled as. So I guess another example is I have a student that has a math disability, and the other day he decided to punch another kid in lunchroom. He obviously was able to be punished according to our student handbook because his disability didn't manifest from, or actually his incident did manifest from his disability. So you have to be able to understand their disabilities and how it may affect them behaviorally or emotionally. So then you can decide if any consequences they may have aren't relevant to that.
And it's always
Um,
interesting to see if that happens, like what would happen if that was during math, you know?
right? Because
You
they
know,
get frustrated because they don't know. We did have a kid though that was emotionally disturbed that made a knife in shop class, and so it was very hard to know if you know, because obviously making a knife in school would be not good, but again, he's
exactly.
emotionally disturbed, so that took a lot of
Exactly.
laboring.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, again, if you just, the parents, if you're really good with the parents, they just really wanted their child to be safe and know that that wasn't the right thing to do, so they were very good about supporting the school's decision just to give them a little bit of break from school to understand that that's not okay.
Exactly.
So I think, was that our last slide, Pam?
Yep. That's our last slide. That's
Yep.
chapter 5, basically. There's a lot of good information in there, especially involving children with special needs. So check that out.